Them man there, ain't nothing like them man there. My man, I stand up, give them man chairs. Them man there.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to For the Culture TV. Myself, RB, Richard Blackwood, and the one they call JB Smooth, Jason Barrett right here. Salute them, let them know.
In the building. And today we have a very, very special guest. I got exposed to her work. We're in the centenary of World War I. And, you know, the whole poppy thing, people wear their poppies in remembrance of. And I went to one of Robin Wilkins' classes and they were selling black poppies. And I was like, whoa. What's going on here? And so Jacinth basically explained the whole thing, and I was like, I need to be in contact with this woman. And so I contacted Selena, and she has graced us with her presence. We are honoured to have you. Selena Carty, ladies and gentlemen, Black Poppy Rose Appeal.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So, all right, let's. I'm going to jump straight in. I'll just jump straight in. I'm going to jump straight in. I'm just going to. All right.
Yeah.
So.
We both can swim.
Right, where did the whole idea for the Black Poppy Rose Appeal come from? So first of all, explain what it is.
Okay.
And then break down to us where the actual idea came from.
So the Black Poppy Rose is a symbol to remember the African, Black, West Indian, Pacific Islanders' contributions to war since the 16th century. Because I felt being born here in this country, and when you're going to school, none of that information is given to us. So when I got older, I started to learn about the contributions that my communities all over the world had been making. So I felt if they didn't tell me, then they haven't told you, and who else haven't they told? And as a result, I don't waste my time moaning. If I see something that needs to be done, I will put things in place to try and start actioning that. And I was working with a group and they were fiddle-faddling around how we remember. They were talking about black ribbons, things that I didn't think were suitable. So I went away and I started thinking, well, what can we do? Marcus Garvey gave us Black for the People. And then Poppy is something that we remember from the war generally. So it's not a new concept for people to have to work out or understand. And then the rose is something that we see in different cultures, which can mean different things. So I brought it in to mean honour and respect, not just for the servicemen, but for the men, women and children who also contributed to the war that we generally don't remember. So as a result, 8 years ago, I took it to the streets and I asked the people, do you want to remember? They said it's long overdue. So 8 years on, we've got much more pins available, so now they're in different languages. We've got a wider reach, so people want them in Japan, Canada, Czech Republic, Germany, France and Belgium. So now I'm trying to see how we can circumnavigate a conversation around healing around our communities and the narratives that generally purport slavery, how we can start bringing our cultures out of history so we can make sense for ourselves.
Can I ask you, maybe this is jumping too far ahead, so excuse me if it does, but
Jump.
Did you meet many obstacles? Because I guess you're going against the construct, aren't you? Like you are.
The general trend.
Yeah, the general trend. You know, like because once again, it's about, we're trying to recondition, right? Not recondition, because maybe that's the wrong terminology, but like some of us would argue, even black people would say, but that's not, you know, the road's supposed to be red and blah, blah. And then, so the powers that be, whomever they may be, did you find there was obstacles from them, or was it a clear road?
The powers that be have been more welcoming of it. Yeah. Whereas our community, again, we're conditioned into having one way, because a lot of the elders were like, we used to give our pennies at school, like in Jamaica when the red poppy came around, we contribute. And I used to say to them, but I don't know that. That's not given to me. So when everybody's talking about the war, I don't hear my narrative. I don't hear narratives that relate to me for me to understand how I've contributed or how my people have contributed to a vital part of history. So the powers that be, I was at the National Army Museum delivering. I work with the Imperial War Museum. I go up and down the country taking this work, and I deliver in universities, I deliver in schools, I deliver for different housing associations. They received it because the content they haven't heard. So everybody knows about the war, but the content I deliver, they're like, I didn't know that.
And I didn't want to fight against that in any way?
Well, it's been a one-woman project.
Okay.
So it's literally just been that, me running that out, seeing and I guess testing the waters and seeing what's available. And as I've been testing, each door opens and we keep opening doors. So I haven't gone, gun blazing as yet, but the presence is out there. And as a result, it's been almost smooth sailing as we've been going on.
But yet our own people have been the ones that have kind of maybe, not necessarily put up a wall, but have had an issue with it.
Yeah, but as time's gone on, it's like the more and more you put the information out there, the more and more we have to start thinking, how did this happen? So, we talk about, not being in a white man's war. We don't understand it was a white man's world. And whereas the West Indies were colonized in the 1700s, when we look at the continent of Africa for West Indians, we don't generally relate to the continent as African people because our history is in the West Indies.
Yes.
So until you get West Indian people to understand that history on the island started in the 1400s, and there had to have been something before then, your kind of narrative is a bit more, you have to be a bit more, it has to be palatable for them to be able to get it, because there's a timeline of history we have to go through to understand what times, what was your mum doing during those times, what was your grandma doing, what was your great-grandma, things like that, so they can start seeing themselves in it to be able to take themselves back on a journey that it's not far-fetched.
And what I've always found is that we as black people, we always believe that our history starts with slavery. It's like we never want to see before that, to know that the way we were prior to it. Just seems that, and also it seems like just society in general, when they look at our history, it's like it's like the benchmark is slavery.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas, in Christian Bibles, there's AD.
Yeah. BC.
BC, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, and you're spot on, and I think that's by design. I feel like, generally speaking, I think it was John Henrik Clarke said that if you believe that your biggest contribution to society was slavery, then anything on from slavery seems like progress.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if you're not doing very well, you're not contributing to society in any meaningful way, you get to go, but that's better than being a slave because that's where I'm coming from. So actually, this looks like progress. When if you go beyond that and realize we're coming from kings, we're coming from queens, we're coming from high society, high civilization, and you look at yourself not doing well, now you've actually got something to measure against and think, no, I need to fix up.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Because of the conditioning around slavery, we then feel we don't have to do much. And I'm not saying we're not doing anything. That's nowhere near what I'm saying, because we've done a lot and we do great things. But when we use that as a reference point, it doesn't lead for further empowerment. And that's what's happening with our children. They're not empowered by a narrative that just takes us to that point, because with the West Indies, that's why I go back to the 1400s, because just before then, we've got empires in Africa, Mali, Songhai, Timbuktu. We've got a timeline of when we had great civilizations, education, trade, economics, and we're not drawing for that. That's not a narrative that, is being sought after, or a narrative that's
heard of. It's what a lot of us have never heard
But then
about.
that's because it has nothing to do with the colonial powers.
That's right.
They will only talk about information or issues that relate to them and their contributions or they're a part of. When you talk about Timbuktu, Songhai and Mali, they've got nothing to do with that narrative. And then when you take it further back, they've got nothing to do with that narrative, and as a result, there's no reason for them to empower us with greatness that comes from a continent that we are told that we are coming from.
I'm gonna let you go first, and then because I got a question.
No, absolute fact. But you know what? It's just even I don't even like to use the word West Indies.
Yeah.
I really don't. I like to use Caribbean just because, first of all, we're not west of India. Secondly, that was Christopher Columbus's mistake. He thought, when I say mistake, because, according to Professor Ivan van Sertima, he actually knew that he wasn't in India, the West. He knew he wasn't in the West Indies. He actually knew. Yeah. It's in his diaries that, he tried to say that it was in the Gulf of the Ganges or whatever. But the fact that we still are using a mistake, a colonial powers, a European's mistake to identify ourselves, for me is a deep problem. Like, I think they should I know we like the Windies, we like the West Indian team. It should be the Caribbean, because at least then it pays homage to some of the people that were on the island, the Caribs that were there before. But the fact that Christopher Columbus he was not in the West of India, but he's called the West Indies and we've kept it, I think it also says a lot.
It does say a lot, but when we look at that aspect, we will then have to change flags. We will then have to change national anthems. We will then have to change the names of our countries. A lot will have to be changed as a result of that, because alongside with Christopher Columbus's mistake came the naming of many of the islands that we see today.
Facts.
And then the colonialization led for, when we get to the independence that we talk about in regards to the political independence, we're looking at flags and we're looking at coat of arms, we're looking at how things are seen. So when we're looking at that, if we're going to erase one mistake, we have to take them all out.
Agreed.
And how prepared as a people are we to do that?
But no, one at a time, man.
Of course.
Go.
Sometimes I said one at a time. One at a time. We just went very Jamaican there. It's bonding. But I was going to say, like, going a step back when we was talking about, like, the condition of our own people and everything. And maybe being that obstacle for themselves in terms of learning about pre-slavery and so forth. When the film Black Panther came out, it was like there was this awakening, right? Which was so weird, right? But it was like an awakening because, you know, obviously it dealt with, like there was this great nation within the African continent where it's like we were still kings and queens and we were still very much powerful, and also showing what we gave to the Western world and blah, blah. And, you know, white people enjoyed the film, black people came out feeling liberated, right? You know, and believed it too. Like, that's right, we are of that descent and blah, blah. So then I use that to say, do you believe we're in a time now where people of colour are much more in tune with trying to seek the information that maybe they were denied, or maybe that they weren't open to maybe a decade before? Because you know, Black Panther was going to be made by Wesley Snipes after he did the film Blade. That was in the 90s, right? Now, you know, they always say that nothing happens before time. I don't believe the film would have had the same effect.
Definitely not.
Right, you know, so, you know, and obviously it was the highest grossest superhero film, bar none. Right, you know, so it touched everybody, but I know how it touched us as a people. So I guess I'm asking you, maybe it's a naive question, but do you believe there is a change in the water, so to speak, where we're now trying to seek further information about ourselves and whether or not we are powerful within ourselves?
I think so, but I think it's more around identity.
Okay.
Because within a lot of us, we have, you know, we talk about the different cultures that we find within us. So like my son, he's got Ghanaian and Jamaican ancestry. So then how does he identify with the world when he's got West Indian or Caribbean and African ancestry? How does he identify as a black man? How does he identify as an African man? And with the film, I've seen a lot of people trying to identify with what culture resonates with them the most and where they can find that. And then through the history, they're able to make sense of why things happened or how they relate to certain people or how they can feel more comfortable understanding a narrative now than they would have done before.
Okay.
So looking at the strength that Black Panther gave to our community around that it is possible that there could have been empires, like Mossy had that empire. They were a cosmopolitan empire based on Europeans mobilizing in Africa and the peoples having to come together to create an empire, to be able to learn and develop, to be able to be sustainable. So it's time about our identity and what we can bring to the table as African or black or Caribbean people. And
maybe this is, I guess, not a segue, but leading on from that. Do you believe that it started to come about, even though these are token people, we're not supposed to worship, what does it say in the Bible? We don't worship...
graven images and all of that.
Yeah, right. But in America, when I was growing up, I remember my uncle brought back these cards from America, and it was just like a white card, and it had a picture of Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and it had a little bio about them and blah, blah. And I remember he said to me, you have to learn these, right? You know, so I grew up knowing about Marcus Garvey, which was obviously with Jamaican roots, blah, blah, right? Learning about all these people that had done great things within our community, and obviously taught me that I could be great just in reading about our history. Then I could say that maybe there was a generation, Jason, you call them Generation X, right? Where there was a decline, where they felt like there was no guidance, right? I believe there's a resurgence now of our time again, right? And I guess it's not an argument, but I just want your take on it. Would you say it came around the time Barack Obama became president?
Certainly.
Because it felt like, because I remember seeing the picture, regardless of what people think about his politics and whether he did what he was meant to do, whatever. But I remember seeing the picture where he was with his family, remember? Right, the inauguration, right? And it was a picture from behind them, right? And you had the American people, like a sea of American people and they were just there. And I was just like, and I just remember how empowered I felt. And I remember at that moment, don't get me wrong, I have some issues about certain things that he did or didn't do in his 8 years. However, that moment changed something inside me. You know, like after his time and blah, blah, now we got Donald Trump, sometimes we wish we had him back, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, we had a lot to say about him and it's like, yeah, we've got Donald Trump now. It's like, we'll take him back, right? But I've got a picture in my house of Barack and Michelle, and he's looking back at her smiling and she's just over his shoulder looking at the camera, like saying the woman that's protecting the man,
Yeah.
right? Behind every great man is a great woman. It's that kind of thing. But what it really showed was something that was missing, which was the family unit in the picture. Yeah. And it felt, that picture, it felt like when Barack Obama came through and the whole family came through, Michelle greeted the Queen and she hugged her. Yeah. Right,
and that's something we do in our house.
Yeah. She hugged her, and everybody, and it made the news. Yeah, like Michelle greeted the Queen and blah, and the group was like, oh my God, and she's like, no, this is what we do. Yeah, right, and then stand-ups were making fun of it, saying, yeah, man, come here, and blah blah. But it felt like we had the people that got lost, unfortunately, got lost. But then you got a new generation that came through, going, about certain values, and we can be great, and blah blah. Yeah. The older ones, we had, as I said, had issue with certain things that he did and could have done and blah, blah. But on the grand scale of things, it seemed like I don't believe the film Black Panther would have done as well if we didn't have
all of the reinforcements
That's
that
what
came
I'm
from
saying.
the Obamas, absolutely.
So do you believe that now there's a domino effect where it looks like the tide's turning or it's turned?
I think there's definitely a domino effect. I think the position of an American family, a black family in our eyes, has allowed for the black family to be valued again. Yes. And I'm not saying that it's never valued within our communities, but I think when you look at it on a world scale, because when we see advertisements and we see things like that, we get very upset if it's not quite as our families are set. We get upset, we send in our petitions and things. That's not how our families are. We don't like seeing it like that. But for the fact that we now have the president of the United States of America, and beside him he has a black wife, because we have issues when black men come of power and they choose other women to be their wives. We have a big issue with that in our communities. Yeah. But for us to see that, and they've got two beautiful daughters, that shows that the black family can work, that there is things that we can achieve, we can go on to do. And I think what it's done is it's inspired young children and people of all ages to be able to look inside themselves and think, how can I also be great? Because it takes being acknowledged, unfortunately, it takes being acknowledged outside of ourselves for us to work out what more we can do and how we can actually hold steadfast in what we're doing.
And did any of that affect, in terms of what you do now, did any of that affect you, or was you always that way prior to, if that made sense?
Well, when I was younger, I don't know if you remember that the man who used to sell the encyclopedias used to come to your doors.
Yes.
So my mum bought them.
Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, she bought them. She bought the sets,
so did my mum.
And used to pay him every week. He used to cover his money, every week his money. And I used to go through those books.
That was Google. That was Google.
My mum still got all of them.
We still have all of them.
Those must be worth money now.
No, definitely.
No, they're not.
But then again, not too many people have got them. Yeah, that's right.
But they're not. There's nothing. They're like door stoppers now, and a big dictionary.
Yeah.
But I used to go through them, and I used to look for the black people in there, and I used to write out all the information because I didn't know where else to get the information from.
Understood.
And I used to write it all out, and I used to make folders with that information. I used to go and tell my friends, oh, did you know? Because I didn't know. But we had the encyclopedia which told us everything.
That's right.
And then as I got older, I started to work out, well, what can I be doing? Because working and being a PA and all the rest of it didn't fulfill me. But learning does, and sharing does. So I didn't quite want to be a teacher because I don't quite want to be in school. But as when the Obamas came, I thought, I'm supposed to be doing this. It kind of reinforced that's what you're meant to be doing. This is what I'm meant to be doing, and work in it and be strong in it, and almost anything you can achieve. Because if you're looking at a history for the Americas and that's what they're purporting and putting forward, then there's nothing that we can't do.
Hello. Good. How are you keeping?
Not so bad.
You all right?
Yeah.
Give me five. How can I help to make most people smile when they come in the station and when they leave the station? Good afternoon, madam. Thanks so much. It's very sweet. Long time no see. You well? Being able to make even one person smile means everything to me. You're looking good, man.
Thank you. You're looking so good yourself. This is about winter.
I always do. I always do. Good evening, gents. Have a nice weekend. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you.
So you're clutching.
I'm clutching.
You're clutching away at the Black Poppy Rose. So you've got different ones. So break it down.
Well, we've got the fabric. So this is so black is for the people, the rose and the poppy itself, and then we have them in pairs, because people like them in pairs. So some people say, the black isn't quite, you can't see it doesn't pop out.
Yes. Okay.
But it's a symbol. So as we're going on, what I want is for our children to decide what it looks like, because it's all well and good us doing things, but they're not going to be interested in a few years' time. They've got to be a part of what we're doing. The conversation must include them now. So although I've started it, I will not go on to end this. This will be something that our children and the futures go on to end. How do we want to be represented? But then we have the pair, because people like it, the two of them together. But what I also did, we've got the different regiments. So we've got the West African Frontier Force. So we've got Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia and Sierra Leone.
And they contributed about 100,000 soldiers, around about 100,000 soldiers over World War I and II, right?
Yes, because that's a lot of uniforms. So there couldn't have been more men than that, because it was a lot of uniforms.
Yeah,
but
at least.
What
yeah,
people don't talk about is the millions of porters and labourers that were used as a part of the war, because they didn't have to uniform them, they didn't have to pay them.
Right.
And they would be the carrying forces, carrying ammunition, collecting the bodies from the war fronts, carrying water, cooking, food, any of the soldiers' training gears, things like that, they would be used. And many of them died, millions of them died. And again, those numbers can't be accounted for. Right. This is another reason why we have the Black Pop Heroes, because when we normally think of war, we just think about the soldiers and the servicemen, whereas there's a wider narrative. What about the women? What about the children? Because when you take all the men from the village, it's the women that's left. Who's there to protect them? Not saying we can't protect ourselves, but again, this equality business, we've got to work out where it stands for us.
Balance.
Exactly.
There needs to be balance.
And if we're missing a gender set from our communities, there's a gender missing or a set missing to do certain things, so there is no real balance. Then our young boys, as soon as they get to 10, they look like adults. So they're being taken too, but who's classifying them as children? So again, it's the narrative about how we classify our children, how we classify people. So with this one, we've got it for the British West Indies Regiment.
And they contributed at least 11,000 in World War II.
In World War I.
World War I?
Yeah.
And World War II?
I'm learning on this part, yeah.
So, and World War II, because I know that World War II from the Caribbean, my understanding was that there was a minimum, at least 11,000.
At least, yes. Because with World War I, there was 10,600.
Okay.
So we round that up to 11. And then World War II, we have 11.
11, yeah. Okay. And they, because my mum actually remembers, yes, people, they come a Stratone, and people come back with their medal. They come back with their medal.
Yes.
The G, ladies and gentlemen, the G.
Now, one of the things that why I was so keen to get you on, I was so pleased when you said that you'd come, and with the work that you're doing, is because I remember talking to a friend of mine one time, and we was talking. I used to do door work. I used to run a security company, and I was standing on the door with one of the other guys, and he said to me, one of my white friends, and he said to me, we was talking about trouble on the door. I think there'd been a little ruckus that had gone on, a little
scramble.
And we got rid of someone, threw someone out the door, get out, come on. And we got someone out the door and that. And then afterwards he started going, we think we're brave standing on the door, but this ain't bravery. This ain't bravery. My ancestors, mate. Could you imagine what it was like being on the front line? Could you imagine what it was like going over the top? And that's bravery, mate. And a barrage of bullets coming. Our ancestors, well, not yours. Yours were probably in a Jamaica getting high or something, weren't they? Smoking weed, weren't they? So I said to him, no.
Yeah, that's right.
No. No.
Little out of yourself.
Little out of yourself. Yeah. You insulted me just a little bit. Just a little bit. You're a little out on yourself. Yeah. Just a little. So I said to him, no. And then I started breaking it down to him. I said that one of my own ancestors, Private James E. Barrett, he was also in World War II and at the Normandy landings and so on and so forth. He couldn't believe it. Yep. So much so, he sort of went along, and it's like he went away and did his own
research.
And he wasn't having it.
Yeah.
And he came back and were like, Jay, but when you went to watch the stuff on the History Channel, you never see any black faces. Yep. Do you think that that's by design? Because there is no way that you could have took so much. Man, the History Channel have lived off of World War II, like every program is about World War II, and yet still I have yet to see. I think I may have seen one on the Asian and the Gurkhas that were included, and even they get quite left out quite a bit as well. Yeah. But the African and the Caribbean contribution is literally, I don't even know if I can call it a footnote of history. Do you think that's by design, or there was just none of the black guys liked the camera?
Now, how do you answer that question?
Well, I think when you look at the ratio of white men to black men in the war, there were more white men in the war. And this is my take on it, is that when you're coming from England and you're sending men from every single village, your first port of call is to make sure all of those men's narratives are put forward. If there's room, where there generally isn't, for anybody else to be included, then that's where we would come in. But I think as time is going on, there just isn't any time to talk about any narratives outside of the narratives that are found here, because there are so many stories, so many women, so many people who contributed. And when you're looking at it from an empire perspective, this is the base. And we've called on you to come and help. We've called on the colonies to be inserted. So you should be remembering in your countries.
But they came as British citizens. They were British.
But again, you should be remembering where you're from, where you're from, because we're remembering where we're from here.
Yeah.
And unless we are talking about it, then it doesn't give anybody else any kind of spurring to say, well, let's add you in as well. So as a genealogist, I draw out people's stories. So just like you've got your relatives, we've now got 700 people who are contacting us saying, my relatives served too. So if they didn't know, and that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. I was going to add to that, because even with the First World War and the Second World War, you had the women's stories were not taught that they were yellow canaries. They're the women that used to make the weaponry, and because of the gases, their skin would turn yellow.
Yeah.
I remember, like, my history teacher, and I think because she was a female, that she went to that part and taught that, because I would say to some of my friends who had male teachers that they weren't taught about the yellow canaries. Right, you know, and because she was a female, she taught us. I remember you saw films on Emily Pankhurst and the suffragettes and suffragists and blah, blah, blah. But I remember she was much more passionate, and you could tell which side she was on in terms of a suffragette or suffragist. You know, like one was the pro, like, the other one was a bit more placid, like Malcolm X, and then you had, you know, Martin Luther King, right? But you know, but she was very passionate about Emily Pankhurst and blah blah. That's the reason why I knew about it, because she spoke about it from that place of passion. But I knew that, looking back in hindsight, that maybe that part of history, the World War and Emily Pankhurst, all of that would not have been taught if it was maybe a man that was teaching it. Wouldn't, do you know what I mean? Because it would have been his perspective as a man, right? Do you know what I mean? It's only, as I say now, there's been movies, I can't remember the name of the film, where it showed about the women and their contribution to the wars. But you've only really, since the millennium, started to see that. Prior to that, it wasn't really taught. And that's within their history, if that makes sense. So that adds to what you're saying. So for them to recognise us, I can understand why they have the ideology of, you know, we asked you to come over and help us, kind of thing. But
again, and because I think it creates, there's so much problems with that, and one of the big problems is that black people in Britain can feel like that, like the way the guy tried to talk to me on the door, like, yeah, you know, your lot didn't do anything. When in actual fact,
we did a great deal.
We did there was and for me, I just feel like shame on the British school system.
100%.
I feel shame on you, because I do feel that if that history is taught in schools, then some of the young black people that are feeling disenfranchised, that don't quite feel a part of Britain and British society, anything, that don't feel a part of it, I think that gives you, because when you see yourself in something, you pay more attention. Every black person knows when they're surfing through the channels,
looking for themselves.
The minute they see a black face, they stop.
They stop.
It's a fact. So the minute you see yourself in history, you can engage in it a lot more. Do you get what I'm trying to say to you?
That's exactly why I do what I do.
Yes.
Because if I'm not in it, I'm going to go past it unless I'm interested in the subject matter. And that's the same with our children. When you're looking at a picture, you're looking for a face that looks like yours. That's the first thing you're doing. And you're like, well, what are they doing there? Then you start to think in your mind, well, if I was there, how would I feel? And then you start to think from yourself, from your own perspective. And we're all walking a different path on this planet. And although, you know, we go to get the same schooling, when we know that we all learn differently. Some learn, you know, through listening, some learn through action, some learn through art, colours, things like that. And we've generalised, and the education system hasn't changed.
That's right. Agreed.
So it's still the same, and yet we're still trying to get the same results for what exactly? So when we're looking at our children and we're looking at the statistics of them in the schooling systems, you know, expulsions, lack of interest, development of when they go on outside of school, what are they going on to do? You know, the less percentages of our children going to universities, things like that. How are we now going to inspire them in a system that isn't really created for them or doesn't give them an understanding of a narrative that can empower them, how do we now bring forward the histories that take away from slavery and insert the histories of actual contributions, actual things that we've done to contribute to empire building? As a result, why our empires aren't nurtured and why our empires and our communities aren't developing in the ways that we see everybody else's.
And just, quickly, we're very passionate about a lot of the sad loss of life that's happening right now on our streets with the youth stabbing each other, shooting each other or whatever. And, I've had some great thinkers and great speakers on the platform. We've talked to some of the greats, the Robin Walkers, the Andrew Muhammads, and I don't want to say to you what is the solution because that's just way too big. But with the work that you're doing, because I feel this is part of it. I feel this is part of the puzzle. I feel like identity is so important, and I feel like this idea that your contribution to history has been nothing except the Europeans' idea of teaching the transatlantic slave trade, like that you were just a beast of burden and that's it, and we decided to free you one day and off you go, and not kind of teaching the contribution of the brave men and women that have, like you say, been a major part in empire building, have been a major part in defending the realm. What's your take on that with regards to the empowering of the next generation and also empowering the adults? Because I feel like one of the big problems is that if you can bring the kids, but if when the kids go home, the adults undo what's been done.
That's right.
Do you get what I'm trying to say to
you? People aren't going to like it, but we have to come from a place of truth, which we're not doing. And the truth isn't an easy pill to swallow. We watched The Matrix. Neo wished he took the other pill.
He really did.
Because Cypher was telling everybody he wished he took the other pill, and he was making moves as a result of that. But the truth that we put ourselves into is that we're now seeing the undoing of that, because we haven't been building on a platform of truth. That's why our foundation isn't set. Right. And when we're teaching our children, because normally what we do is we try and protect, we're trying to protect everyone, so we don't give them the truth. But then when we're giving them the truth, it's subjective to our opinions. So where we've learned from things, we've all read books, we've all watched documentaries, we've travelled, we've done these things, so we've worked out what that answer means to us. But then I can't give you that answer because that's mine based on my interpretation. I can't give you the answer because I've had to understand that inside myself from my own upbringing, things I've watching Richard growing up, all of those things, and seeing how it is. But when we enforce that, and that's the key word, we enforce it onto our children. We say, you must learn music, you must do this, you must do that, because we want better for you. Where's the concept for better coming from? Because when our people came over here, education was that concept. Just get a good job. That's right. Was the narrative, but that was the truth that they were coming from. As a result of getting a good job, we now have lost culture. We are now amalgamated into a new culture, and I don't think we've understood that we've created a new culture being here for the time that the generations of what they're classifying as the Windrush generation, because we was here before then. Absolutely. And before and beyond. But again, when we're looking at that Windrush generation, we've created a culture here alongside other people that didn't just come from the West Indies, from the continent of Africa, from the Europe, and we've created an environment here that I think we have to learn to understand. And looking at the truths that from our cultures that we've contributed to that to help our children understand how they've created that. Because when we look at language, they speak a different language now. You change language because you don't feel like you belong. You don't feel like you're a part of something. So you do something to make sure you can make it your own. When we look at the West Indies, you have patois. There's different patois over the British colonies, colonial islands. You've got different creoles. You've got papiamento for the Dutch colonies. Again, those languages were created because the peoples spoke different languages. And it takes great genius and great intelligence to be able to create something for all people to be able to learn that they can now go and teach in universities for other peoples to learn those languages.
I think one of the problems, and we're wrapping up, but we're going to have you back because I just feel like we just scratched the surface. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I feel like though, with regards to again another term I'm not really feeling is patois. Because broken anything already degrades your language. So if you're referring to the way that you speak as broken anything, you're already
Yep.
Yeah. So I like to use the term, the Creole term. And I feel like our youth, because we have not respected what that is and the borrowed words. I did a study on looking at the words that came from Africa and that are still within, like, you know, so the word for nyam is
the same word,
right.
yes.
It's the same for, and so on, you know, uno,
Yes.
you know, you lots, you know. So all of these things that we take for granted in our Creole that we don't actually recognize that they're actually connections to the continent, their connections to an existence before the Holocaust. And so the Holocaust of enslavement.
Which
and
Holocaust?
So the Holocaust of enslavement. The Holocaust of enslavement. Yeah, the African Holocaust.
Very clear.
The
We
African
have to,
Holocaust.
because there were several.
Well, no, yeah, there have been several. You're right. Agreed. And so the point about language and the point about creating culture, I think part of the problem is some of the negative things that we see in our cult are actually cultural.
Yeah.
You know, I spoke about this with Andrew Muhammad and was saying that unfortunately music is culture.
That's
and
right.
a lot of our music has got violence. A lot of our music contains explicit sexual language. It contains misogynism. That's culture. A lot of our speech, street speech, man, that's wicked.
Yeah.
Yo, man, I murdered that,
Yep.
saying that something's good.
Yeah.
So these cultural things, and I feel like when we came out of enslavement, that we as a people did not decide who we were going to be. And we've been kind of, it's a mismatch, a melding of, there was never a coming together and saying, and creating a culture and creating, and that's one of the things that I really admire about the Jews, is that they have a specific culture that unites them right across the diaspora. And in that culture is ingrained success. In that culture is and you know, Jewish music hasn't got using derogatory terms to describe other Jews. It's just not there.
But
it's not a part of the culture.
Would you not believe that, or would you not think that part of that is, and this is not downplaying any form of Holocaust that any race had gone through, but the Holocaust the Jews that went through spanned over a few years.
Yeah, 5 years, 5, 6 years.
There you go.
Like
Whereas
We
ours,
could even say 10.
yeah,
there you go.
A decade,
right?
yeah.
Whereas, so in terms of the conditioning,
You're right.
you know, you got to remember there were people that were born into slaves, that were born into slaves. They, like their grandmothers were slaves and they were
Absolutely.
slaves.
Absolutely.
Right? So you've got 3-4 generations of knowing nothing but slavery, as opposed to people that now that are of a certain age now that will say, my grandfather was in those camps or was, but that's it,
Yeah.
right? So there wasn't, if they were within that Holocaust for over 100 years, then maybe their analogy on success would be different, right? And I think that, you know, because I'm just listening to what you're saying.
No, do you know what, Richard? I totally agree with you, and you're not saying anything wrong. But my argument is always, I feel like sometimes, and I'm not saying you, 'cause obviously I know you, and you're not on that mode, but I think sometimes as black people we can get defensive.
Yeah.
When we're being told to fix up.
Yeah.
But
We can get
again-
defensive. No, real talk,
true.
we can get
But
defensive.
it's true, but again, it's because of the level of truth that we have to own up in ourselves.
Absolutely.
And when we're looking at other people's culture, we then we almost have to cross-reference what they've been through, what we've been through. When you talk about breeding farms, where they would send women to be bred by black men so they could have children to create a workforce, not for families, for a workforce, and you're looking at generations. Because what I teach is that every 100 years you have 5 generations. So women will start having children around 20. That's just to rationalize it out. But when you're looking at 15 generations of people who have been enslaved, what does that do to your mindset? Because I tell people, me being here today, I'm probably 4 generations from slavery? What has that done to my mindset? How much freer am I to be able to talk about the things that I feel, fear or understand or whatever I go through?
And listen,
and as a people, we haven't, again, we are all over the world.
Yes.
But there is never in the history that I've learned, I can't talk for everybody, in the history I've learned, where after 1834, the apprenticeship act of the West Indies, there has never been a point that we've sat down as a people and said, and had time to say, this is what's happened to us, this is how we feel about it, how are we going to, you know, build on what we're doing. We haven't put any models in place.
Agreed.
We follow somebody else's parliamentary orders.
Agreed.
We follow their laws. We follow their economic infrastructure. We follow their loaning systems, their banking systems. From my research, because again, I can't talk for everyone, we have
mine
not
as well.
created a framework for us to understand what it means to be black. When we're born, when our children are born, we're told we're black. What does that mean to us? If you don't eat chicken, if you don't smoke weed, if you don't wear a certain type of trainers, if you don't have a certain kind of haircut, you're not black. How I talk, people tell me I'm not black. If I'm a vegan, you're not black. I like the opera, you're not black. All the rest of those things. So we live in a construct where within our homes we've established a culture. And we purport that on the rest of the societies. And then we come together and say this is normal because it's normal for us, and I will hold you accountable to that, and I will judge you as a result of that. That's what defines your blackness. Right. And now, in the age we're living in, we've got all of these, equal opportunity statistics. Which box do you tick? The further we continue, the closer we have to try and identify who and what we are, as people tell us, the further away from community building we can actually develop. Because when we're looking at people on the streets and we all look very similar, we're all coming from different backgrounds, but at the same time there's still that disconnect. How is it that I can't go on the road and see any brother and sister, anybody who looks like me, and be out for their well-being? As I would for my own family? Where is that disconnect? How am I not trying to build a business? How am I not trying to build, education? How to get them in so we can start building and working on our communities? Because there is no understanding of a framework that has been set by us to be able to put that together and forward.
We can stay all day, because I wanted to come back on that, but my directors, they're going mad.
One thing I can say about this show is that we've never, thus far, and touch wood, and it will never be the case, but we've never had somebody in the hot seat where we've had to wrap early because it's like, there you go, that's it. It's always been, our director's always behind because of the red card first, there you go, right? And we see it and but because there's so much information,
so much.
And I know that the people at home are like this as well, which is good because that's what we want. We want them to,
definitely.
When we have you back on the show,
100%.
It's like, okay guys, let's continue from where we left off. And I think that's what we've started.
No, without a doubt. Because I wanted to come back, but I had a lot to say, but we got to go. This is your camera. How can we get in contact with you? How can we find out more about what we do? We just want more.
Excellent. So I'm a genealogist, so you can find me at yiwae.com. That's for genealogy if you want your family trees done. www.blackpoppyrose.org, anything to do with World War I and beyond. So we go back to the 16th century, Portuguese engagements with Queen Nzinga. We talk about the American Revolutions, Maroon Wars, Napoleonic Wars. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to be able to start. So the healing starts with the conversation, and that's where we're aiming from. Thank you.
Boom!
You know what? That's the ending right there. Boom.
JBN Comics presents Heirloom. When an asteroid falls from outer space to Earth, a runaway slave finds the asteroid and is endowed with superhuman powers. He sets about on a mission to free his people and change the world. Unknown to him, the very asteroid that gave him his powers carries a dark secret that could destroy the world. Heirloom, the first hero.